Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Adrian. Today we'll be finishing up the 2005 Acura TL. We have to do the CV axles, the lower ball joints, and replace the front brakes. Let's get to it. Alright, for starters, we're going to take this axle nut off right here. You need to take a flat tip screwdriver, put in this little groove right here, and pry up to free it from the lock here. We're going to use a 7/8 drive breaker bar with a 36mm impact socket. Small note for when breaking this axle nut loose, there's so much pressure on it, it's probably going to wind up turning the whole assembly here. So to prevent that from happening, I took a screwdriver and put between the rotor slots, and whenever I put pressure here with the breaker bar, that's going to keep the wheel from spinning. Also, since I've already taken the struts out and replaced them in the last video, since there's nothing connecting here to the lower control arm, you can either take maybe a brick or a nice chunk of wood and put it underneath it. I have this small jack, just put a little bit of pressure under there, so whenever I'm trying to take this axle nut off, the whole assembly is not going to sit there and bounce. After that, we will undo the tie rod bolt, lower ball joint, the sway bar connect link here, and then we'll work on breaking the upper and lower ball joint free. Next will be the tie rod end. We're going to use our 1/2" drive ratchet with the 19mm socket. Remove it. Next will be the sway bar connect. I'll take a 3/8" drive breaker bar and a 14mm socket. Now if the whole thing spins, take a number 5 Allen key and put in the end, and then we'll use an end wrench to get the nut the rest of the way off. Now for the lower ball joint, we're going to use a 1/2" drive ratchet with the 17mm socket. I've already used the breaker bar to get it loose, so it should come off easy. Okay, for removing the brake disc, for starters, since the pads are still in it and it's still got a good amount of pressure on it, we're going to remove the Phillips head screws here. There are 2. Be real careful when you're taking them out. They're prone to stripping because generally if you're changing your discs, they've probably been in there for a while. But you can put your Phillips head screwdriver in here like this and tap the end of it with a hammer, give it a little bit of vibration. They should break free with no problem. Also, spray them with a little bit of penetrating fluid, always helps. Okay, with the tie rod free of the knuckle, we have full range of motion essentially with the assembly here. So we're going to turn it all the way like this to remove the brake pads. There are 2 little pins, one here and one on the bottom. They're just kind of held in there by a little pressure clip. So take a small punch or a small screwdriver or something, put here, give a few taps, and this whole thing will slide out. Then we'll be able to take this out and pull the pads out. You can use a pair of pliers. They're in there kind of tight. These are somewhat loose. Use a screwdriver to kind of press in the pistons here. So I got a pair of pliers. Grab hold, give it a few wiggles, brake pads come out. Okay, now we're going to remove the caliper bolts right here. It mounts to the knuckle. There's 2 19 mils, one here and one on the bottom. Use a 1/2" breaker bar and a 19mm socket. It should take them right out. Before you completely remove the brake caliper, you want to take out these two 10mm bolts here. It's a little bracket that holds the fluid line on here. So we can take the whole caliper assembly and set back over in this area and secure it. And then we will continue on to the lower ball joint. Disc off. Alright, with the lower ball joint separated from the control arm, now we can move up to the upper ball joint. So we can take this entire assembly out. And the only reason I'm doing that is, like I said, I'm replacing the lower ball joint. Generally you wouldn't have to pull this whole section out to replace the CV axle, but ball joint's got to be replaced. The rubber around is not holding grease. There's holes all in it, so it needs to come off. But before we take this off, we're gonna have to chase this wire right here. It runs into the firewall. There's a little plastic clip and a little connector on the inside. I believe it's orange. We'll disconnect that, and then I'll demonstrate how the ball joint separator works on the upper control arm here. Okay, I've removed the cotter pin, and I've left the castle nut flush with the bottom of the upper ball joint threads. And that's so whenever we're pressing or using the ball joint separator, the pressure doesn't mushroom out the threads at the bottom. Alright, so now I'm going to put the ball joint separator on. Now you want to be fairly gentle putting this on. You don't want to damage the rubber, but you simply slide it underneath the boot ever so slightly, and then we're going to tighten it down until we get a little bit of pressure, just like so. And then we're going to crank down on this here nut just enough to put a little bit of pressure, and then we're going to tap here on the control arm with the hammer. Alright, so here we go. Give it a few. Alright, that should be pretty good. Take the hammer here. Boom, and that's it. And there we go. Now we can get the lower ball joint out. But first, we got to take out this ring race right here. This silver piece right here. We're going to spray some penetrating fluid around on the outside here and let it soak for a second. And then what we're going to do is take a flat tip screwdriver and very, very gently go around the outside, prying up ever so slightly. You don't want to bend or break this ring here. Okay, while our penetrating fluid's doing its job, I'll notice that our CV axle is completely exposed and easily we'll be able to replace it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out. I'm going to have to tug on it a little bit. There's a little snap ring that connects into the gearbox, so it's a little difficult to pull out, but it should come out with a little bit of effort, and we'll install the new one. Alright, our CV axle's out. So when you pull out, you want to inspect your little area right there. Make sure that seal's not damaged or in any way. Let's get this thing installed. It's lined up. There we go. So here's the ring. It's out. As you can see, it's not damaged at all, but it is corroded up. It's got a bunch of grime and stuff on it. So I'll go through all this stuff during reassembly. Spray it down with some brake fluid cleaner or some type of degreaser scrub it down with the wire brush, and reinstall it. Alright, so we got everything set up. Need a 13/16 socket. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch drive breaker bar. And my little setup here is kind of jerry-rigged, but it works. I have a place to put my foot, so when I'm pulling up, tightening this unit here, pushing the joint out, that it stays on the ground. And I'm also using the wall as a little bit of extra leverage, keeps it from moving. Alright, old ball joint is out. Don't need that anymore. Alrighty. So now what I'm going to do is take some brake parts cleaner and a little bit of grease and a wire brush. Clean up this area here, get all the corrosion and dirt, little scuffs off of it, and then grease up the new ball joint and press it in. Alright, I've cleaned up the area a little bit, put some grease on it, and lubricate it. Well, we've got our new ball joint here. I've also put a little bit of grease on the surface that's going to be sliding in. Sometimes when you're putting these ball joints in, you have to take off the little rubber boot, but in our case here, we got pretty lucky. It goes straight through. You don't have to take the boot off, which is awesome. So here's the press set up for the installation of the ball joint. As you can see, just line up the top here on the top of the ball joint, make sure it's nice and straight. Put the receiving end down for the bottom, nice and straight. And then we're going to crank on a little bit. Alright, the new ball joint is in. Nice and easy. This one's different than the stock one because it's got a little snap ring. Don't forget to put those on. Hold it in place. Now, all we got to do is reinstall everything in reverse order, and we will be complete. And then we can move on to the next side. Morning. I stayed up last night, finished up the other side. I didn't really see the need to film it, considering if you take it apart you should be able to put it back together. But everything's reinstalled. Both strut assemblies, both CV axles, both front brakes and pads, both lower ball joints, all complete. There's a few extra things I got to do. I got to install the underskirting, put the wheels on it, and then this job's 100% complete. Take a look right here. Got everything put back on, all the wiring and everything plugged back in. CV axles in, new pads, new rotors, new lower ball joint, new strut assembly. That's going to be it for part 2 of this video on the 2005 Acura TL. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, remember to do that. Stay tuned. I got a couple things coming up. Thanks for watching. Small caveat to reinstallation. Make sure you follow the manufacturer's specs as far as torques go. I know some people just use an impact gun or maybe just hand tighten everything down, but it's got a torque spec for a reason, so go ahead and do that. I'll put a link in the description below of where you can find some torque specs, but generally you can pretty much Google it. Also, the special tools that I use, the ball joint separator and the press to get the ball joint out, if you don't have those, you can probably rent them from Advanced or one of your local parts house. They usually have those tools on hand and it's really cheap. Yep, that's it. Cheers.